the Rugby Championship is turning out to be an interesting one. We do have the usual suspects at the top, but things are not exactly smooth sailing for everybody. So it's an interesting couple of scenarios that we've seen, and an interesting couple of things that have played out. But let's see what the second half will hold. If you look at the first couple of games, it looked like there was complete dominance by the Springboks. The games that they had against Australia looked like relatively easy ones. They could even field a couple of younger players to actually get them over the line, and they cruised past that. The All Blacks, a win and a loss, but in that second game, that win proved their dominance. Australia overall, a bit more of a challenging start to the tournament, but it was against the reigning world champions. And then Argentina had the highs of the win in New Zealand, with Greavy coming up with a match-winning try, and then the lows of that crushing defeat at the same time. Looking at this past weekend, however, was a very interesting couple of things that happened. The Australia-Argentina game was a very interesting one for a couple of reasons. Mostly because you could see that Argentina stuck to their guns with their very, very pragmatic way of playing. It wasn't very exciting, it wasn't very thrilling, but the thing is they were very effective when it came to ruck and mauls and things like that. But you could also see the Joe Smith influence coming through for the Australian team. They were a lot more focused on defence, they were a lot more accurate when it came to rucks and mauls, and even though they conceded that first try from a maul, after that they actually held back the Argentinian team pretty well, and you could see those flashes of brilliance that comes in when Joe Smith coaches a team in terms of the precision that they have at the breakdowns. If Australia can bring that, and they can bring in a lot of their exciting younger players running off the ball, then we're going to see more of those tries like the 9 going over the poles. It was, however, not a perfect display by either team, and Australia missed it for a couple of minutes and not putting together 80 minutes as a whole. If they put together 80 minutes, however, it becomes a whole different ball game, and then it becomes very interesting. The Springboks versus the All Blacks was another epic. It wasn't the best game in terms of precision across the board, but it was ferocious throughout. There was a lot of crunching tackles, lots of hard rugby played throughout the whole game, and to be very honest, the All Blacks had the best of that for the majority of the game. To be very precise, the first 66 minutes of the game, they were the dominant team. The Springboks had a lot of mistakes that they made throughout that time. There were a lot of fumbles, lots of bad decision making leading up to that point, but they stayed in touch. And overall, the score at 27-17 with 14 minutes left, you would have thought, okay, New Zealand should just wrap it up and that should be the end of it. But there were two changes that actually came from the South African team. There was the long run from Fussy with a little kick that he put through that pinned down the All Blacks in their own 22. That was the first little flicker of hope that the South Africans had. The second one was when Smith actually stole the ball in their own 22, and we started a counter-attack from there. With that being said, though, I'm not exactly sure what happened to the All Blacks in terms of that implosion, or if it was just the dogged determination from the South Africans not to lose the match at Ellis Park. And I think it's more of the latter. One thing that was, however, very interesting was that there were 2 tries actually that were awarded that were a little bit controversial. There was the Bongi Manambi try, and if you just had a look at TikTok and Facebook and whatever, you could see that there was a lot of controversy about that. But the same goes for the New Zealand try from the line-out, where there were questions asked about the supporters moving in front of the judge to actually obstruct at the line-out. A very simple answer for both of those. The Mbonambi try should not have been a try. The New Zealand try should not have been a try. With both the supporters being offside and obstructing, as well as the the pot changing direction, and I do feel it might have been an obstruction there again. So both of those should not have been tries, but that would have just equaled out everything. So we can kind of push that one to the side. But yeah, it's sad that something like that would actually even come into play as a consideration in a game like this, because overall it was a clash of titans and it was wonderful to see. However, with that said, there are a few things that are actually going to transpire over the next couple of weeks that will be very interesting. For the first time in a couple of years, we're actually going to have an exciting Bledisloe Cup. It's not just going to be Australia pitches up, they get hammered, and New Zealand walks away with the cup. Based on this last performance of Australia, they are definitely on the up, and you can see it despite their defeats to South Africa in the first two games, that they are progressing in the right direction, and that is something very encouraging to see. So it would be entertaining actually watching those last few games of the championship as well. But before we even get to that, we still have this weekend coming up, and there's going to be a massive clash between the All Blacks and the Springboks to come before that. And that's going to be a mouth-watering one. We'll have a look at it next week as well, just to recap what happened there. But with that said, there's one thing in particular that stands out, and it's something that is a bit of a worrying factor for all four of these teams. Some have coped with it better than others, and that is the age of the players. Now, the most obvious one that has stood out between all of the teams is that Argentina had to recall Creevy to their squad. After retiring after the 2023 World Cup, he was pulled back into the fray as a 39-year-old player who hadn't played for a while to kind of make up the numbers. Now, that is a worrying factor. And the thing that I don't understand is that the Argentinians actually have had players really putting up their hands and performing well at the Under-20 championships for the past couple of years. So, not sure exactly why they don't have more of those players coming into the squads. However, if you have a look at the South African roster, it's not much better. They've got players way into their 30s that have won 2 World Cups, but they're moving on in age, so it's becoming difficult for them to keep fielding that team. However, there's been an interesting shift from the Australians mostly over the past year and a half, and it came with Eddie Jones, and he got a lot of flack for it before the World Cup, but he actually got a couple of players playing a World Cup, struggling, getting hammered at times, but now there's a few players with 10, 15 odd caps under their belt starting to come through and starting to get comfortable with the overall international scene. So they're actually kind of leading the pack in that regard. South Africa has done well bringing in a couple of younger players for the tests versus Wales and the one against Portugal, and then with the tests against Australia. And some of those young names are going to be stars for the future. So overall, I think Australia and South Africa have done fairly well in starting to get the new players in. Lots of work to be done, and it's going to be interesting to see how the teams adapt. New Zealand, however, and especially Argentina, they need to make a plan, and they need to bring in a lot of these new players very soon into the rotation. And the end of the year too is going to be the ideal one. They need to kind of take a step back, know that they might suffer a shock defeat or two, but get those players in. If they don't get those players in, they're going to struggle when it comes to World Cup time in a couple of years again. But way before that, they're not going to have players left to actually play at the top level, and then it's going to be a scramble. You want those senior players actually in the mix, helping out in guiding and teaching those young players how to play the game.